Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to TVP World. I'm Diana Skaya, and this is Eastern Express. What do you do when your peaceful border suddenly feels like the next front line? Well, in Finland, they don't wait for the shooting to start. From concrete fences to drone armies, the Nordic nation is hardening NATO's longest border with Russia and making sure the Kremlin knows it's not worth crossing. This time around, we go to Europe's northern frontier, where the Cold War is getting a modern reboot. There are borders that exist on maps, and there are borders you can feel. Finland's northern frontier with Russia is rapidly becoming the latter. So without further ado, let's take a look at our latest report to find out more.
Russia is quietly but steadily expanding its military footprint near the Finnish border, in what NATO officials call the early stages of a long-term build-up. The expansions follow Moscow's pledge to grow its armed forces in response to Finland and Sweden joining NATO after Russia's 2022 invasion of Ukraine.
This is only 16 kilometers to Russia from here, so we are that close actually. And that makes you think, so what if they decide to come to this side of the border as well, just like they went to Ukraine? Without telling, or just like they came here in 1939.
Satellite images reveal Russian helicopters at a base near Murmansk, their first appearance there in 20 years, just 160 kilometers from Finland and Norway. Finland, now NATO's easternmost frontier, closed its land border with Russia in late 2023 amid a surge in asylum seekers Helsinki blamed on the Kremlin.
If you think about the whole eastern border, we have the longest border of all the EU states with Russia, 1,340 kilometers.
Finnish defense officials warn Russia could triple its troop presence near the border within 5 years.
Now let's zone in on the east-planing portion of our show. Russia's invasion of Ukraine sent shockwaves throughout Europe, forcing two historically neutral nations to rethink their stance. Now let's see how Finland and Sweden abandoned decades of non-alignment to join the North Atlantic Alliance in a bold response to Moscow's aggression.
In 2022, Russia's invasion of Ukraine reshaped European security, prompting Finland and Sweden to abandon their long-standing neutrality. For decades, both Nordic nations maintained non-alignment, balancing relations with Russia and the West to preserve peace and stability. However, Russia's aggression shattered their confidence in neutrality as a shield. Finland, sharing an 830-mile border with Russia, felt the threat acutely. Moscow's actions in Ukraine, coupled with its history of pressuring neighbors, raised fears of potential Russian expansionism. Sweden, while lacking a direct border, shared these concerns, viewing the invasion as a violation of international norms. Public opinion in both countries shifted rapidly. Polls showed overwhelming support for joining NATO, a stark contrast to earlier hesitancy. In May 2022, Finland and Sweden both applied for NATO membership. It took some time for the countries to join, as not all member states were on board with that idea. After some perturbations, Finland joined the alliance in April 2023, and Sweden followed in March 2024. Russia's actions, intended to curb NATO's influence, backfired, expanding the alliance to its doorstep.
And now let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. The quiet, forested 1,340-kilometer line that once felt like a soft seam in Europe is hardening fast. And as Finland scrambles to fortify NATO's newest edge, the ghosts of the Cold War are beginning to stir. It's a transformation that would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. Now, the invasion of Ukraine changed that overnight. For Finland, a country whose very identity is shaped by its uneasy history with Russia, the decision to join NATO wasn't just a security policy, it was a generational shift. Now, Finland is moving from a policy of pragmatic coexistence to one of deterrence, and the result is visible everywhere. Concrete barriers and barbed wire now slice through old border crossings that once buzzed with Russian tourists. Entire local economies that once thrived on cross-border trade have gone silent. What used to be a motorway to St. Petersburg now ends at a steel gate. The country has revived conscription, expanded its reserves, and now aims to have 1 million military reservists by 2031, a staggering number for a nation of just 5.8 million people. Even older reservists are being retrained for roles like drone operations and radar control. But Finland's new posture comes at a cost. The once bustling border region is now an economic dead zone. Local politicians and dual citizens have even challenged the border closure in court, with several cases now pending before the European Court of Human Rights. But Finland isn't budging. For Helsinki, the priority is simple: security first, diplomacy later. Finland is making sure the line between them and Russia isn't just visible, it's inviolable. And Russia? Putin says Finland is no threat and says Russia has no plans to attack NATO. But even as he downplays the danger, satellite images tell a very different story. Soviet-era garrisons near the Finnish border are being dusted off. New warehouses are under construction, and Moscow has pledged to bolster its military presence in the region. Of course, this may not yet amount to an imminent threat, but Finland is not waiting to find out. The country is now home to NATO's new northern headquarters in the town of Mikkeli, just 2 hours from the border. American, British, and Finnish officers are already working side by side, planning for the scenario everyone hopes never arrives: a Russian military move on NATO's northern flank. The message from Finland is clear. It's not worth it, Russia. They aren't looking for a fight, but they are preparing to win one. Finland now holds over half of NATO's total land border with Russia. Finland has moved from debordering to rebordering, and they're making sure that this time the line holds. And now here to shed more light on the issue is Emil Kastehelmi, military expert at Blackbird Group. Emil, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, let's get straight into it. What concrete evidence have we seen in recent months that actually confirms that Russia is expanding its military infrastructure along the Finnish border?
Well, there have been numerous cases in various bases and garrisons. So, first of all, there's been, well, in the Karelian Isthmus, there's been events also in the Murmansk Oblast and also near Estonia. So these can be, for example, observed via satellite imagery and other ways too.
And how do you interpret Russia's strategic intent behind that renewed activity in places like you just mentioned, Murmansk among them, and Kamenka and Karelia as well?
Well, the Russian strategic intent is based on the larger geopolitical shifts that have happened in the area. So as Finland and also Sweden joined NATO, the power balance, so to say, in the area changed, and Russia had to answer it somehow. So this included significant organizational changes, for example, the re-establishment of the Leningrad military district. They have been also expanding many brigades into divisions, and they have also been constructing these all kinds of military infrastructure in the area. So there's a lot of that, but basically these developments, they aren't like they shouldn't be thought as clearly offensive actions. So just because Russia is expanding their units doesn't mean that they are attacking Finland in the near future.
Okay, but what about given the reopening, for instance, of Soviet-era bases like Kandalakasha and Olenia, for example? Would you say that you see a pattern that's similar to pre-invasion buildups in Ukraine?
Well, an invasion buildup would look different. So we can link these developments that we have seen to the organizational changes that we know that are happening. So basically, I would not talk about a preparation for an invasion yet. However, of course, it's not a pleasant development that a large amount of Russian soldiers or like additional units will be stationed near our borders. Currently, it looks like there will most likely be thousands or even tens of thousands new soldiers permanently stationed near Finland and also near Estonia.
All right, here you're talking about new soldiers, and actually it's been quite a heated topic lately, not just in Finland, but in many European countries in general, I mean, including in Poland. What can you tell us specifically about the structure of the conscription model of Finland? How does that work exactly?
Well, Finland has a very good conscription model, which has been going on for dozens of years already. So here in Finland, we are of course prepared for all scenarios which the Russians could throw against us, and one of the bases for our defense is of course a large army consisting of reservists. And to achieve that, the conscription is a crucial part of it. So I would say that Finland is one of the most prepared countries in Europe, maybe even in the world. And because of that, many of the Russian actions that may seem worrying for many foreigners don't actually cause that much panic in Finland, as we can confidently say that we are prepared for any hybrid threats, but also for conventional threats.
Emil, what about women in Finland's military?
Well, conscription is mandatory only for the male population. So the women can voluntarily also join the defense forces as conscripts, and also they can apply to become officers, for example. So yeah, but however, in the future, it is one possibility that this situation has to change somehow. It may be a possibility in the future that these things will also be mandatory for the women, because the birth rates are not that high, and it creates some issues for this traditional model, which is only based on mandatory service for the male population.
Emil, has Finland's accession to NATO clearly accelerated this Russian buildup, if I just go back to that, or were these plans already in motion from a while back?
Well, it depends. Some of these developments have already begun pre-2022. So the things that we see, they are not all fully new events, and so on. There have been some developments already ongoing, but then again, these the most significant organizational changes are these things that have happened after Finland joined NATO, and also Sweden. So I would say that currently, as we're looking at the situation, the most significant things are happening at the organizational level, but it is very likely also that in the future there will also be, for example, upcoming infrastructure projects which are also linked to Finland's accession to NATO, as Russia needs to also, for example, house soldiers, a large number of additional soldiers near Finland in the future.
How capable do you think that the Russian military would be of sustaining such an expansion, for instance, while they're still heavily focused and engaged in Ukraine?
Well, Russians have been relatively capable of replacing their losses in Ukraine. So they can recruit still people into the system, and even though the casualties are very heavy in Ukraine, the Russians still have been expanding their units and generating more power. However, of course, the full effect of the recent changes near Finland's borders will come into effect only after the war in Ukraine has ended, or if maybe frozen in a way or another. However, as to say, like, nothing very radical near Finland's borders will change in the terms of Russian manpower there until the active phase of the war in Ukraine ends. But we are still waiting and monitoring on how this will actually happen and what will it actually look like, because there are still some uncertainties.
So, Emil, let me ask you this. I mean, you just said that possibly there wouldn't be any activity until the war in Ukraine ends. But now, what's your assessment of the threat level to Finland at this point? Is it, I mean, mainly deterrence, preparation for a potential escalation? How do you see that unfolding?
An escalation would mean that there should be a larger buildup of Russian forces, like if we're talking about a conventional escalation. So just by developing garrisons and military bases, Russia won't be able to begin an offensive just by doing that. So there needs to be additional changes. However, of course, these things need to be observed very closely. So if there are some anomalies, so to say, then of course the threat levels and scenarios need to be updated. However, currently I'd say that well, there's more than just full peace and a full-scale war. So there's a lot of things in the spectrum between these two situations. And I think the most likely threats at the moment for Finland are different kinds of hybrid and sabotage operations. Maybe weaponization of migrants, maybe inflicting damage on critical infrastructure, cyber attacks, and so on.
That was my next question to you. What about,
of course,
exactly what you just said, cyber attacks and disinformation campaigns? What about that, if you can just say a word about that?
So of course Russia is participating in these kinds of activities. It is, of course, waging war on many levels, of course, in the information space and in the cyberspace too. However, at the moment, the conventional forces are still tied to Ukraine. So Finland has already faced some of these hybrid attacks or operations, so to say. And I personally think that we have not seen all yet. So it's likely that Russians will try new tricks against Finland, Sweden, and Baltics, all the countries in the vicinity, also in the future, because as we know, Russia is just becoming increasingly hostile and increasingly aggressive. And well, if the rhetoric very significantly changes even from this, then it also signals something that the Russians may be even willing to go further with their escalation.
Emil, just very briefly, do you think that is there any chance that the situation could actually stabilize diplomatically, or are we seeing the beginning of a long-term military standoff in the region?
Well, it is difficult to say in which direction this will go. Currently, Russia shows no willingness for any. Sorry, my dog is barking in the background. But anyway, currently Russia is still an aggressive country and is showing no signs that it would like to normalize the diplomatic situation. So we simply have to be prepared in Northern Europe.
Thank you so much, Emil Castahelmi, military expert of Blackbird Group, for being with us here on Eastern Express today.
Thank you.
And we move on to the Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you don't want to miss. Russia's latest education policy shift targets Ukrainian culture. Now, the Kremlin plans to eliminate Ukrainian language and literature from school curricula, even in occupied Ukrainian territories, sparking concerns of cultural erasure.
Russia is preparing to remove Ukrainian language and literature from its national school curriculum, including in occupied Ukrainian territories. The Education Ministry cited the, quote, changed geopolitical situation as justification for the move. Until now, Ukrainian was a mandatory subject for children in the partially occupied Zaporizhia and Kherson regions and available upon request in areas like Crimea, Donetsk and Luhansk. The new policy would eliminate more than 700 hours of Ukrainian language instruction and almost 300 hours of Ukrainian literature from grades 1 through 9, leaving only minimal literature content in grades 10 and 11. Critics argue the move contradicts Russia's own demands for respect towards the Russian language in Ukraine. This shift follows the spring 2025 release of a Russian literature textbook that omits references to Ukraine, including the Ukrainian heritage of writer Nikolai Gogol, highlighting a growing trend of cultural revisionism.
Russia is expanding its military recruitment pool. Lawmakers in Moscow have passed a bill allowing stateless individuals to sign army contracts, offering fast-track citizenship in return for service.
Russia's State Duma has approved legislation that allows stateless individuals to enlist in the military, part of a broader push to reinforce troop numbers amid the ongoing war in Ukraine. The bill, introduced by the Justice Ministry in April, amends laws on military service and defense and now awaits a final vote in the Federation Council before being signed into law by President Vladimir Putin. Under the new rules, stateless persons will be treated like foreign nationals in recruitment processes and will be eligible for simplified Russian citizenship after completing military service. Lawmakers hope the policy will attract up to 5,000 new recruits. According to the FSB, nearly 90,000 stateless individuals entered Russia in 2024, though this figure may include repeat entries. Meanwhile, the Interior Ministry recorded nearly 6 million foreigners and stateless people registering for work last year, with fewer than 1% receiving work permits.
And that's all for this episode of Eastern Express. Stay tuned for more here on TVP World.